When AEW signed their first contract extension with TNT in January 2020, it came with a huge announcement. It said that AEW would be getting a second show on TNT. Dynamite was a smash hit right out of the gate, and it did way better numbers than anybody could have expected. So it only made sense that Warner Media wanted more of AEW. But with the announcement of a second show for AEW came skepticism from fans. A lot of fans were wondering if AEW would be able to keep up the quality with another show. People were actually worried that overexposure, oversaturation of AEW would be a real thing. But over the past year and a half, AEW's roster grew exponentially, and it became evident that another show was in fact needed. And so we waited over a year and a half after the initial announcement was made for the second show to premiere, and we finally got the world premiere of AEW Rampage. And what a premiere it was. This is Tranquilo Club, and this is the stellar premiere of AEW Rampage. This past Wednesday on Dynamite, AEW announced a hell of a card for the debut episode of AEW Rampage, and it became pretty clear that AEW wanted to establish their second show as a huge show and equal to Dynamite. And they made that known when they announced the card, when they said that the first match in Rampage history would be Christian Cage versus Kenny Omega for the Impact World title. In addition to this, we would get Dr. Britt Baker, DMD, defending her AEW Women's World title in her hometown of Pittsburgh against Red Velvet. And last but certainly not least, we would get Miro defending the TNT title against Fuego del Sol, with the stipulation that if Fuego were to win, he would get an AEW contract. He would be all elite. So 3 big title matches, 3 matches with high stakes on the debut episode of Rampage. Not bad for a 1-hour wrestling show, and you got the feeling that this show was going to be fast paced and that it would fly right by. But even then, I think all of us were shocked by how fast that 1 hour flew by. Time flies when you're having fun. So showtime came, and the debut episode of Rampage would take place in front of over 5,400 wrestling fans. And of course, they were loud, they were passionate, they were respectful. There's nothing like AEW crowds in wrestling, because from the moment the show started, the crowd was hot, and that improves the viewing experience. And they were hot because the first match they got was Kenny Omega versus Christian Cage for the Impact World title, and what a match it was. Look, when it was announced that Christian Cage would take on Kenny Omega for the AEW World title at All Out, I was kind of bummed. But you know what? They kind of won me over after the angle they shot on Dynamite this past week. And then this match completely won me over for this program. Look, I was an OG TNA fan. My dad was buying their Wednesday pay-per-views when no one was buying them. So I was watching this company when it was barely getting started. And I'm saying that because a lot of people think that I'm underestimating Christian. No, I like Christian. I was a huge fan of his TNA run. What I'm saying is I wasn't really feeling his AEW run so far. But you know what? After this Omega versus Christian match, I'm kind of okay with Christian challenging Omega again at All Out for the AEW World title. But of course, before we get there, I must say I was proven wrong by Christian, and him winning the Impact World title by beating Kenny was a great moment, and the crowd popped huge for it. And despite losing, Omega was protected pretty well with the kill switch on the chair. It's cool to see Christian hold the Impact World title over a decade after he held it for the company when it was under the NWA TNA banner. And look, I know some people aren't happy with Christian pinning Omega because apparently people had convinced themselves that Hangman was supposed to be the one to pin Omega first. But that doesn't even matter. You think when Hangman is facing Omega in a packed arena of over 10,000 fans and he wins, people are gonna be like, yay, Hangman is champion. But Christian pinned Omega first, so the moment is ruined. No, nobody's gonna give a shit. Nobody's even gonna remember that Christian beat Omega on this episode. Look, apparently it's the cool thing now to write paragraphs upon paragraphs about Hangman's story in AEW so far, but I was doing it before it was cool. What I'm getting at is I'm as hardcore of a Hangman fan as anybody else is. But relax, tranquilo, he's gonna get his moment. When he comes back after the birth of his child, he will be the one to beat Omega for the AEW World title. I guarantee it. But for now, don't worry that Christian beat Omega for the Impact World title. It created a great moment, it was a great match, and it cemented Rampage as a show where anything can happen, like Dynamite. And it's made me look forward even more to what Christian and Omega will will do heading into All Out. After this, we had the match between Miro and Fuego del Sol for the TNT World title, and I'm pretty sure we all knew how this was gonna go. Miro as TNT champion has been unstoppable. I'm not even really a fan of his, but I gotta admit, he's on a good run right now. And then there's Fuego, who's a hardcore fan favorite. This guy won people over just by being on Sammy's vlog. He's become universally beloved by the AEW fanbase, and because of it, we've all demanded one thing: for Fuego to be all elite. And if he were to beat Miro here, he would have had a chance. But of course, that chance was very small. Fuego is also known as the master of the Tornado DDT, and he hit Miro with a couple of them early on in the match, and it gave me hope. But I should have known better, because as soon as I blinked, the match was over and Miro killed Fuego for like the third week in a row on Dynamite. And of course, we all knew this was coming, but seeing Fuego lose once again was just heartbreaking for all his fan base. But then Sammy Guevara's music hit, and he came out with Tony Khan, and he had a clipboard with him. Then Sammy grabbed the mic and he was telling Fuego that sometimes in loss, there's victory, and how much the AEW fanbase loves him, and how much the AEW locker room loves him, and how Tony Khan told Sammy that it was only right that Sammy be the one to tell Fuego that he is now officially all elite. And the crowd pops huge, and the whole time that Sammy was talking, Fuego had tears in his eyes, and now I have tears in my eyes watching this, and it was one of the most feel-good moments in wrestling that I could remember in recent memory. This year-long journey for Fuego, being this jobber on Dark who came in during the pandemic, made the most of his opportunities, made the most of his time on Sammy's vlog, became beloved, got over, and finally earned his way to a contract with All Elite Wrestling. My friends, Pixar couldn't even hold a candle to this story, and I do plan on making a video entirely on Fuego's rise in AEW. But for now, I'll say that AEW created a feel-good moment, not just in their company, but in all of wrestling on the premiere episode of Rampage. And it couldn't have happened to a more deserving wrestler in Fuego del Sol. Next up came the main event, the AEW Women's World Champion Britt Baker defending her title against Red Velvet. Before the match happened, there was this cool segment where Mark Henry interviewed both women, but they did it in a way that kind of reminded me of like UFC and boxing fights, and it really got me hyped for the match. Of course, Red Velvet came into this match being public enemy number one, as this was Britsburg. Britt was in her hometown and she was being treated like a god. But I think it's great how AEW clearly knows this is going to happen, so they don't insult their audience's intelligence, and they had Red Velvet playing the heel and Britt Baker playing the face. Simple concept. And I must say, I really enjoyed this match. I think Red Velvet is pretty underrated when it comes to the women in AEW. She has a great story, one similar to Fuego del Sol actually, where she went from being a jobber on Dark to now being all elite. Then of course Britt Baker, who's a megastar for AEW now and came across even bigger than usual because she was in her hometown. I feel like the more that Britt grows as a character, the more she becomes underrated as an in-ring worker. I mean, I'm not saying she's like the best in AEW by any means, but she has improved immensely when it comes to her in-ring work. And because of that, her and Red Velvet were able to put on a good main event worthy of being the first ever main event for Rampage. If you saw my video on what I wanted Rampage to get right, I said that I really wanted to see more women's wrestling on it. So it's really cool to see that the first Rampage ever had a women's main event, and it didn't feel forced or anything. It felt earned, and I feel like they delivered as well. So hopefully we get to see more of this. Of course, when the match was over, after Britt Baker retained her title, she kept attacking Red Velvet, and then Chris Statlander, who was sitting at ringside, came in to make the save. And then Chris Statlander was attacked by a returning Jamie Hayter. Yes, Jamie Hayter, who we haven't seen in AEW since 2019. She's now back, and she's aligned herself with Britt Baker, and as it turns out, she's the backup that Britt Baker had been talking about over the past few weeks. And this just made the AEW women's division a whole lot more interesting. It's great to see Jamie Hayter back. She's gonna be huge for the AEW women's division, but it's even better to see that the AEW Rampage debut ended on a women's angle. That's something that most of the time wouldn't be possible on Dynamite, so I'm glad to see that Rampage gives us hope for the women's division, which is something that we've been wanting for a long time now. A great way to end a great 1-hour show of wrestling. If every episode of Rampage is gonna be this good, then I don't think I'll ever miss a single episode. Almost 2 years ago, I feel like AEW knocked out the AEW Dynamite premiere out of the park, and I feel like they just did that again with the debut of Rampage. I mean, sure, there are some small nitpicks I didn't like with the show, most prominently the 4-man booth. I do hope they cut it down to 3 or hopefully even 2. But besides that, I think the show was a home run. This really showed that AEW's roster is deep enough to have another show, and the proof was in the card itself. In all 3 matches on this card, there was a participant that was signed to AEW over the past year, and that just goes to show you how much this second show was needed. And if every episode of Rampage is booked like this one, then AEW is gonna have 2 major hit shows on their hands. This company is currently firing on all cylinders, and I think it's all gonna culminate next week on the second episode of Rampage, The First Dance. That episode will take place in Chicago, Illinois, the United Center, in front of the largest audience in AEW history. It's crazy how AEW has made this 1-hour wrestling show that's on at 10 p.m. the talk of the wrestling world the day before SummerSlam. SummerSlam that's taking place in a stadium. There's not a doubt in my mind that AEW will deliver on what they've been hyping up next Friday. And they made sure to get us excited for next week's big show by making the premiere of Rampage a memorable one. I can't remember the last time I was this excited to be a wrestling fan. Every time that Dynamite ended, I looked forward to the next week. And now, every time Dynamite ends, all I gotta do is wait 2 days for Rampage. In a world where everything becomes oversaturated and everything gets a pointless sequel, AEW has given us reason to believe that they'll deliver quality wrestling for 2 different shows every single week from here on out. And as a lifelong wrestling fan, that excites me to no end. The Rampage era has officially begun.